a pandemic, low oil prices, storms battering our coasts, devastating fires in the West. So much to occupy our minds and drive our worries. There's an argument to be made that we need another focus. So tonight we're looking at the Basin in a different way as we ask, why does art matter? I'm Becky Ferguson, and this is One Question. In this kind of environment, why does art matter? This evening we'll ask that of leaders in the Basin art community. First, Kathy Shore, artist, teacher, and owner of Baker Shore Fine Art Gallery in Midland. You know, we find ourselves thinking about pretty serious things now, whether it's COVID or oil and gas prices or politics. So where does art fit into all of that? Why is art important?
Well, a quote that I've used in some of my catalogs over the years is that art is the highest form of hope. And I think that's extremely comforting and fitting for this time. I think because as humans we're probably designed to create, to be creative, looking at art and making it is a natural and important part of life, and that's kind of what we're celebrating here at Baker Shore, and I think it does bring a lot of hope and joy during troubled times. I think art has played that role historically throughout all of time.
So it's a very important process for the artist who's doing the creating. But and talk a little bit more about why it's important to the audience, and then why it's important to a community to have access to art.
Okay. Gerhard Richter, an artist that I particularly like, says that picturing things or taking a view is what makes us human. And I think that act of being open to seeing someone's perspective is a really important aspect of art. It causes us to maybe see things in a new way, to be open to something that's completely different from our frame of reference. I think artists often are on a quest to kind of shake up what's traditionally been done and try to find a new way to express something. And I think that's one of the most important and exciting aspects of art.
You also have been in the past an art teacher. So will you talk a little bit about the importance of art for people who are learning, whether they be children or adults?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like having the gallery is kind of an extension of that educational process. I'm just educating a different audience in a slightly different space, and I think that's been one of the most enjoyable aspects of having this gallery. And I've made it my mission to not be an intimidating gallery or gallerist, because I want people to feel at ease, whether they know a little bit or they know a lot, whether they're already collecting or they've never set foot in a gallery. That's been a really nice aspect of having this space.
And again, for the person who is creating the piece, or a child who is learning about art, are there emotional benefits to participating in art?
Definitely. I think it's very therapeutic. It's an expression of what's inside us that comes out. There's not a right or wrong. It's I think it's a very healthy activity for a person of any age. I think sometimes adults have been programmed to believe that they aren't artists, that they have no ability, but I have yet to meet an adult art student who didn't have some ability in there. It's just been squashed.
So if they can just stop criticizing themselves.
Right.
I read a great quote from Thomas Merton, and he says, "Art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree completely. It's interesting to see what people connect with when they walk in. It's not always what they expect to love. Sometimes I'll have a person who's only had super representational pieces in their home, and they walk in and they just make a connection with a very abstract piece of art, and it's exciting. It's kind of inexplicable sometimes.
Do you give people instructions about how they should look at a painting? Would you do that?
I try not to influence too much, but I love to prod and encourage, and I guess I encourage openness most of all. I think the art speaks for itself, and with it comes all the history, you know, the time that it was painted, where it hung before, who owned it, and what the artist was trying to achieve or accomplish. So each piece has a backstory that is probably one of the most fun parts of learning about art.
How do you encourage people to look at non-representational art?
Well, I have a lot of abstract expressionism, and that group of painters, it originated in the United States, in New York, the New York School, they were called. Their goal was to focus on color and form and emotion as opposed to something representational. So if you think about it that way, you can really engage with the piece, just knowing that that was their intent. Occasionally I'll have someone walk in and say, well, I could, you know, nudge their spouse and say, I could do this. And I usually say, no, you really probably couldn't. And the other thing to remember is that any good Abex painter could probably sit down and paint a very realistic portrait of someone handily, because they've had that basis, that backbone in their training. They've just chosen to depart from that.
Well, and then I also know that there have been some periods in history when non-representational art has also become political art that communicates in some ways.
Definitely, trying to break down whatever barriers are perceived. A lot of the post-war painters were definitely trying to heal in some cases, and maybe communicate something about what they'd been through and the hope of what they were moving toward as they immigrated to the United States, for example. So.
Well, I like that you started out with hope, and then we're ending talking about hope. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Becky.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
For 58 years, through many a boom and bust, the Midland-Odessa Symphony and Chorale has made music for the Basin. We sat down with Executive Director Ethan Willis, a musician himself, for his take on the transformative power of music. Ethan, thanks so much for letting us come out here to visit with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Our question for today is, why does art matter?
Right, I've been thinking about this a lot. Because this question, you can come at it from different angles all the time. You can come at it from an economic viewpoint or an educational one for the kids in our community, or even just a philosophical one or a spiritual one, like the argument of what does music do for the soul. And each of those has so many different answers, and they're all really good.
Well, let's start with the spiritual one.
Sure.
The good for the soul.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, of course, right now, man, wouldn't it be nice if we had more arts going on, especially live arts. For our musicians, the phrase "in concert," when you do something in concert, you're doing it in cooperation with each other. So one of the beautiful things about any live event that you see with a band, it could be at a bar, or our symphony, is you're seeing a collective group of individuals with individual tastes and backgrounds coming together to work on one collective idea, one piece of music. And in that way, they have to kind of push aside their differences and find commonality, but at the same time still bring to the table what's individual about themselves. And it's this really cool way to kind of notate how, kind of a representation of how we want society to be, right? This understanding that we have differences, but then this collective understanding that we can come together for a common goal. So the musicians do that all the time, and then think about a symphony, and you're talking 30 to 70 musicians, depending upon the concert, on stage at one point doing that together. It's really, really powerful. For our audience members, I'll tell you, if there's one thing I want to stress as a musician myself, is the audience is so important. And I want audience members to realize that. I think a lot of people go to concerts and almost see it like they're watching Netflix. Mm-hmm. So they're looking at their TV and they don't think they're part of it. It's kind of like you're passive in the chair. But I'll tell you, having not played since March and then played recently in early October, I miss the audience so much. And they made such a huge part of what I did as a musician. Like they didn't realize it. We were at a coffee shop and they were enjoying coffee and conversation, but I was sitting there playing, and the message I was giving to them was, I'm so glad you're here. Like, thank you for coming. You don't understand how nice it is. And those moments where they'd give back with a clap or something like that was this nice exponential energy that just kept getting heightened and heightened over time. And that's what our audience does for our symphony. So you can enjoy things virtually, and that's kind of what we're having to do through COVID. But just experiencing arts live in the moment, there's just something so deeply special and kind of an energy to it all that I think we're really missing right now.
You talked a little bit about the experience of music for the musicians. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like for the audience? Right.
So as an audience member, one of the beautiful things about music, and particularly symphony music, is, if you've ever experienced a symphony performance, you realize that, it's not a 3-minute pop song. There's a lot going on, and in that experience, you usually have different emotions, different nuances to the piece. It really is kind of like a collective like human experience wrapped into an hour and a half. One of our symphony musicians actually wrote in early May about how music is vital for a rich life. Can you still live life without your music? Sure. But if you want a richer life, it helps in that way. And that's one of the ways as an audience you experience that. It's just this full engagement with the sound around you, with the musicians on stage and the energy they're giving, with your audience members that you're sitting next to that's also enjoying it. That collective experience is really can be transforming if it's in the right moment.
It sort of takes you out of your head.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, very much so. And it lets you kind of deprocess your day. I mean, for myself, having experienced symphony music, outside of the musician standpoint, just enjoying it, it almost does the same thing as like a nice jog on the day or something like that, where you just kind of take a deep breath, relax, and kind of let the music kind of speak to you and kind of clear out your head in that way. And I don't know if it's so much a clearing of the head as much as it's just a kind of a different state of being, which is really nice. You can get from other things, but like I said, the magnitude of the symphony just heightens all of that so much. So
I would think that it's pretty unusual for a community of our size to have a symphony of this size and of this quality. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'm not originally from here, right? I'm from up north, but I moved to West Texas 6 years ago, and I stayed for a couple of reasons. the arts are appreciated here. I can feel that. And the music is good. The musicians that are here are good. And part of that has to do with the symphony. They come here to play with this group. They're from all over the country. Some of our musicians in this symphony are not from this area. They've been training at school for 4, 6, maybe even like 9 to 10 years, depending upon how long they were working on their degrees, to work on perfecting their craft. And they're here to share that craft with us and with each other. So that is really special for this area, that they're willing to come and live here in West Texas and join the MOSC. But also, that Wagner Noel Performing Arts Center is great. And having that space for us to perform, I mean, it's almost like, it truly is like we're living in a huge metropolitan area with the availability of the facilities, the caliber of artistry that the musicians bring to this area, and it's just in this nice, great, really receptive, good community, and it's just really special.
You've talked a lot about what art does for the quality of life for an individual. Could you talk a little bit about what it does for a community in terms of the citizenry and in terms of economics?
Sure. I would love to see, and I'm just new to this job, so maybe it's been done, but I'd love to see some economic impact studies on the arts. And like I said, they probably exist somewhere. But what we usually find is if somebody goes to an arts event, you know, they don't just come to an arts event. They might come and enjoy food beforehand, or maybe a couple drinks afterwards, or go to an exhibit before they go somewhere, like go and enjoy live music, or even get a hotel for the evening if they have to stay here. And all of those things, you know, people don't just come to an arts event and spend their money at the arts event. They're spending it in a bunch of different ways too. So a lot of times a single ticket for a symphony performance will earn 5 times what we're charging for the collective community and the local economy. And I know that's the case with a lot of arts organizations, but specifically the symphony, that's usually the bang for the buck. And then also, of course, we're getting all these great educators in this area too, right? These performers also teach a lot of our students in all of our local school districts, and they're earning money that way and spending money that way and participating by living here in this economy. And so, you know, the greater impact of having arts here is always going to enhance economically beyond the ticket sale.
Ethan, thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and we're so appreciative of the symphony and what it brings and means to our community, and we look forward to hearing performances again very soon.
Thank you. Yeah.
Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. Those are the words of Pablo Picasso. We know about dust in the Basin, and Sheila Perry knows about art. We spoke with Sheila, Executive Director of the Odessa Ella Noel Art Museum in the museum garden. Well, Sheila, thank you so much for making time to talk to us today, and let's just jump right in.
All right.
Why does art matter?
I think art matters because all of us want the same thing for the people in our lives. We want them to lead fulfilling, expansive, thought-provoking lives. We want our children to succeed. We want them to be creative, innovative. They need to be flexible in our modern world. And those are the things that you actually foster and, work on and hone when you actually participate in the arts.
So you talked a little bit about the audience there. Talk a little bit about the artist and why art is important to artists.
I think people have to realize artists, their primary goal is just ask the question. They'll take whatever subject matter and what they put out in the world. It's asking you to ponder a question. And especially in like contemporary art and postmodern art, there's no didactic answer. It's like the audience, your meaning and what you take from it, and your thought process is often the last piece that completes the artwork. So artists are integral to our society because they're there to ask the tough questions, to get us thinking about things in a different way, and to engage with our world in a way that we wouldn't normally do, because it's not, what we do every day. And so, whether it be conflict, whether it be memory and loss, whether it be beauty and happiness, artists are about like putting something out in the world and allowing the audience to interact with it, take from it what they will, and take that meaning and make it part of themselves and make them think about things. And so that's why artists are so important to our society.
And specifically for West Texas, why do you feel like a museum like this beautiful one here is important?
West Texas, we kind of are way out here in a way, in the fact that, yes, a lot of us travel, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us don't have the means to travel. A lot of us are, probably never getting to New York to see MoMA or getting to Washington to see the Smithsonian. So I'm going to share you my own experience. I was born and raised in northern British Columbia, far away from like any kind of art museum or art gallery you'd get. There were no artists in my town. I lived in a logging town. And the thing is you don't know what is going to stimulate your child. And so I grew up not knowing about art or museums. And then I hit senior high school, and there was one teacher. And he did a locally developed class, and it was talking about the history of civilization through art. I was hooked. And it was like I couldn't wait to see the rest of the world, go see some of the stuff that we looked at. And it changed the trajectory of, my whole entire life. And I was in a place very much like Odessa, right? And the thing is I often say to parents, like, oh, well, what is art to my child? And I'm like, what happens if your child is not a brain? What happens if your child is not a jock and not really good at physical sports? Where are they supposed to find a place to connect with and explore all the things that they're dealing with as they come of age? You need to have the option, and you need to have the places where kids can create, interact with each other in a safe manner, where they can explore the things that they're going through as they, transfers from adolescence to adulthood. You don't know what is going to stimulate your child. And so it's really important for us to be out here, because yes, we want to be out here for every single person in our community, whether your family has been regular museum goers or you've never stepped across the threshold at all. Because it's important, because you just don't know.
There's also an economic development component, I believe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, the arts are their own economic driver. I will use the example of New York City. What is New York City? Everybody knows that place. It's primarily two things. It's the financial industry and it's the cultural industry. And that takes in everything from fashion to food to museums. When you think about what that whole city is built upon, it is built upon the financial sector and it is built upon culture. And so they've actually done myriad numbers of studies that show that the cultural tourist, and a lot of us are that, pretty much everybody I know, whenever they go somewhere, whether it be London or Chicago or wherever, they usually take in at least something, a museum or a play or the opera or whatever. And it's proven that those people, on average, they spend at least a sixth again, like 60% more than the average tourist. Because they'll buy the tickets to the opera. They will go out for a nice dinner beforehand. So culture is a direct economic driver. But there's also secondary things that you have to think about. There is an economist, Todd Hirsch, he puts it really eloquently. He's like, yeah, there's the direct economic thing, but even more importantly is what it does for the attraction and the retention of talent in the labor force. You know, that is the second round impact, economic impact
So
that
a
the arts
quality
has.
of life.
You know, if you were to ask younger people today, they're not interested in just moving to a place and just for work. You know, nowadays people want more than just work. They want their place to be an interesting place to live. They want it to be where their child will be stimulated. So he uses the frame, you know, culture is infrastructure for the mind. And I think it's really important to think of it in that terms because, yeah, we want to be stimulated. You know, we want to be engaged. And we sure want that for our children because we want them to grow up and be successful and be engaged, you know.
Well, I love that infrastructure of the mind.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Sheila, thank you so much for making time for us today. We really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for coming.
Art can be a drink of water in the desert, a break from day in and day out. Art gives our eyes and mind a chance to rest, to muse, and to think. The Basin is blessed with many marvelous museums and galleries, fine theater, and wonderful musical opportunities, offering many ways to soothe the soul. Our painting this week is entitled Checker Players by March Avery. Avery was born in 1932 and grew up in Greenwich Village. She's the daughter of famous American artist Milton Avery and illustrator-painter Sally Avery. Avery's paintings draw from the imagery of everyday life, which she articulates with bright color. She adopted her father's abstract simplicity while transforming it into her own lively style. Her portrayal of humble, everyday events is imbued with both a sense of humor and a sophistication of palette and form. March Avery continues to paint to this day, splitting her time between Manhattan and France. She exhibits regularly in New York City as well in other galleries across the United States. You can see this one at Baker Shore Fine Art Gallery in Midland. Finally, thank you for watching One Question. We'll be back each Monday at 5 following Basin Life with Krista Escamilla. We'll answer the questions you want to know from the people who know. If you have a question, send it to us at onequestion@basinpbs.org. Up next, BBC World News America with Katty Kay, followed by PBS NewsHour. I'm Becky Ferguson. Good night.